Peace be with you. Earlier this week, a visitor to the community center asked me what Unitarian Universalists believe. I find this question complicated to answer. I'm definitely not a fan of the flippant response many have of, well, whatever you want. Because that's not really what Unitarian Universalism is. We have principles and sources of truth. There are boundaries to what we believe. But unlike other religions, our circle is very wide and encompasses many beliefs and rituals and practices that fall within the scope of our principles and sources. So it's kind of hard to give a concise, pithy definition of our faith. And the somewhat usual reaction to go into a discourse on the 7 principles and sources is surely to cause eyes to glaze over. So after a pause, I responded with the answer that I typically give, which is, we believe in the power of love to liberate, heal, and transform individuals and communities. We accept that love for ourselves, and then we multiply it as we love other people. Throughout the 230 years of the history of our faith, our spiritual ancestors have taught some variation on this theme. The Winchester Profession of Faith of 1803, the foundational theological statement of the Universalist Church, proclaimed belief in God, a God whose nature is love. Throughout the century and a half leading up to the 1961 merger that we had with the Unitarian Association, we never really varied in that belief. And our final independent declaration of faith before the merger was in 1935 with the Washington Declaration, which called God an all-conquering love. Most recently, and last week to be exact, delegates of the member congregations of the UUA voted to begin the process of amending Article 2 of our bylaws, which is where our profession of faith or our beliefs are found, and to adopt values that incorporate and encompass the spirit of our current 7 principles. And all of these values, according to the submitted draft, center on love. Our Unitarian Universalist conceptualization of love is not some hokey, mindless, valueless credo. Rather, it is an intentional commitment to covenant with one another for the betterment of ourselves and ultimately of our world. It is a declaration that we will, to quote Shakespeare's 116th sonnet, look upon tempests and not be shaken. Love, as we follow it, is a spirit that leads us to respect the inherent dignity and worth of every person, to strive for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, to accept one another and encourage spiritual growth, to practice a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, to uphold the right of conscience, and to practice democracy, to make a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and as our ultimate goal, and to respect the interdependent web of all existence. These, our 7 principles, are not easy to live. We are constantly bombarded with people who do not respect their own dignity and worth, much less the dignity and worth of others, and are particularly, for that reason, particularly difficult to love. Figuring out just what exactly is just, equitable, and compassionate in given circumstances is complicated, since justice, equity, and compassion are not one size fits all. Accepting one another as they are is also a challenge, which requires a great deal of empathy, humility, and compassion, as well as the ability to listen to other people. The search for truth and meaning has stymied human beings from great thinkers to great blockheads since the dawn of time. Often our neighbor's conscience leads them to decisions that we object to, and we have to figure out how to still live at peace with them. Working towards a world community where billions of people with different beliefs, cultures, languages, and aspirations can also feel like an impossibility. And how many of us actually understand and can articulate what the seventh principle really means? How do we live in a world where we are interconnected, not only with one another, but with nature? See, Unitarian Universalism is not as clear-cut, easy, or loosey-goosey as we might have surmised, which is why I always just fall back on love. If you surrender yourself to love, that's hard enough. But if you can do that, even in part, then the rest of the seven principles, the rest of the seven things that we aspire to, kind of fall into place. Surrendering yourself to the spirit of love is an intentional commitment to facing the tempestuous messiness of living in community with one another and treating people better than they sometimes or often deserve. It often involves foregoing the response or behavior that will bring the most satisfaction in the moment, in favor of showing a compassion and grace that is uncommonly lavish. These reactions are relatively foreign to us in an age where getting the upper hand and having a snappy comeback are in vogue, and where socially aggressive behavior is mistakenly admired as strength. But we should and we must resist that urge to one-up and to conquer those who have wronged us. We must resist the need to be right and to have our perspective and position legitimized and triumph. Because ignoring the call to love and instead treating our sibling, sister, or brother in a way that we ourselves would not want to be treated is gaining the world, but losing our soul. Our Universalist forebears were not idealists or naive. They recognized that no one is perfect, that we fall short every single second of every single day of the standard of glory of that which we recognize as holy. If we all take a moment to examine our hearts and our minds and our story, if we're honest with ourselves, we will see that we are often not worthy by worldly standards of being loved. Yet we are worthy of love. Because if we look closely, we can see the whole arc of our lives and how our lived experiences have influenced and still are influencing how we live our lives, how we are. And seeing ourselves as we are, looking boldly at the entirety of our lives and radically accepting all of it, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly, how they've all played a part in making us who we are. And if we are wise, we rejoice in the good and the beautiful and recognize the bad and the ugly as explanations for where we fall short, as well as starting places for our transformation. And it is this radical self-love of seeing ourselves as we are and not being shaken, and not trying to manipulate and mold ourselves into something that we simply cannot be, but instead bearing with ourselves in love to progressively make ourselves into the best possible version of who we can be. That results not in our salvation from the specter of hellfire in the afterlife, but rather from hell in this life that we have constructed for ourselves or which others have constructed for us. And it is from this radical self-love that we, in turn, truly begin to love our neighbor as ourselves. We begin looking at our neighbor's bad behavior and picturing the arc of their story, and compassionately recognizing that their behavior is a symptom of feeling unworthy of love. And it is by radically loving our neighbor even when they frankly don't deserve it, and by treating them with compassion and forbearance, that we as a community progressively build the beloved community we have been called to be, that we hold ourselves back from creating hell while inviting others to walk away from pain and isolation. Now, does this radical practice work every time? The answer is as complicated as the answer to what the Unitarian Universalists believe. Yes, it works every time, and no, it doesn't work every time. From my experience, every time you surrender yourself to love rather than to vindictiveness or selfishness, it becomes easier. And over time, following the spirit of love becomes your nature. And even if your neighbor resists radical love, and they often will, you walk away with peace and goodwill. And it is in this reality that we are only in control of our own actions, our own selves, that we find a freedom which isn't possible in a belief system which tries to fit and cram us all into a one-size-fits-all identity. It is in taking responsibility for ourselves and our actions, by loving and accepting and working on ourselves, that we are able to truly love, accept, and dwell in harmony with other people. Beloved, my invitation to you today is the church's second call to you, the call to accept that you, just as you are in this moment right now, are loved more than you could ask or imagine. That you, even with your imperfections, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, your past, your present, that you right now are worthy of love. And to recognize that in accepting that love, you will be progressively transformed as you are liberated from fear and healed from self-alienation, and you will become, in time, the best possible version of yourself. I caution you, while I issue this invitation, that it is not a superficial fix to a systemic problem. You will not see overnight change. It takes time, because this invitation is an invitation to do some rather hard work. But the hard work is worth it because you are worth it. The hard work is possible because we commit through covenant to do it together. As you journey this week, remember to be kind to one another, and especially to be kind to yourself. And may peace and love abide with you and me until we are together again.